The stars had always belonged to the Valkyrie Dominion, or so they believed with absolute certainty in their hearts and minds for 12,000 years. Their empire had spread across the galaxy like a dark tide that consumed everything in its path, and in all that time, no species had ever stopped them from taking what they wanted. High Commander Zethral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and watched the yellow star grow larger on the viewing screen before him. This star was called Sol by the primitive creatures who lived on the third planet orbiting it. And those creatures called themselves Human. Zethral found the name amusing in a way that made his sharp teeth show in what his species considered a smile. The humans had no idea what was coming for them, and that ignorance would make the conquest so much easier. Behind his flagship, the Grand Armada stretched across the void of space in a formation that would have terrified any species intelligent enough to understand what they were. Seeing 12,000 warships move through the darkness, each one carrying weapons powerful enough to crack a planet's crust, and warriors bred for nothing but conquest and destruction. This was the largest fleet the Dominion had assembled in 3 centuries. And Zethral felt pride swelling in his chest as he thought about the honor that had been given to him. The Dominion Council had chosen him to lead this invasion, and he would not fail them. High Commander, his tactical officer, called out from across the bridge. We have passed the outer boundary of the Sol system and are now entering what the humans call the Kuiper Belt. Zethral nodded slowly and turned to face the large holographic display that showed the entire solar system in glowing detail. The humans had been studied for many years before this invasion was approved, and Zethral had read every report at least 3 times to prepare himself. What he had learned made him confident that this would be one of the easiest conquests in Dominion history. The humans were a young species, barely more than infants by galactic standards, and they had only recently learned to leave their own planet. Their technology was primitive and crude, relying on chemical rockets and simple nuclear reactors that the Valkyrie had abandoned thousands of years ago. But what made the humans truly pathetic in Zethral's eyes was not their weak technology, but their constant fighting among themselves. The intelligence reports showed a species divided into hundreds of nations that could not agree on anything important. They fought wars over resources, over beliefs, over invisible lines drawn on maps that meant nothing to anyone outside their tiny world. They poisoned their own air and water with industrial waste while arguing about whether the poison was even real. They spent more time and energy fighting each other than they ever spent looking up at the stars that would soon bring their doom. Zethral had conquered 17 worlds in his long career, and he had learned to recognize the signs of a species that will break easily under pressure. The humans showed every single sign. What is the status of their detection systems? Zethral asked his science officer, a thin female named Veltara, who had served him faithfully for many decades. Veltara checked her instruments and made a sound that indicated amusement before she answered. Their detection systems are laughably primitive, High Commander, and they appear to be focused entirely on tracking small rocks that might hit their planet. They fear rocks? Zethral asked with genuine surprise in his voice. Indeed they do, High Commander, and their biggest telescopes are pointed at distant galaxies rather than at the space around their own system. This information made Zethral laugh, a deep rumbling sound that echoed across the bridge and made his officers join in with their own laughter. A species that feared rocks but could not see an invasion fleet entering their territory was not a species that deserved to survive as anything but servants. Dominion would put them to better use than they had ever put themselves. Send the standard message to all ship captains, Zethral commanded as he settled into his command chair with the comfort of a predator who knows his prey. cannot escape, minimal bombardment of the planet's surface, and maximum preservation of infrastructure and population. You wish to keep many of them alive? His first officer asked with curiosity. The humans breed quickly and have strong bodies for their size. Zethral explained with cold calculation in his voice. And the mining colonies on the outer worlds always need more workers. This was the way of the Dominion, and it had been the way for thousands of years without change. The strong conquered the weak, and the weak served the strong until they were used up and discarded. It was natural and proper and exactly how the universe was meant to function as the Grand Armada moved deeper into the Sol system. Zethral allowed himself to imagine the glory that awaited him when he returned home. The Dominion Council would praise his name and add new honors to his family line that would last for generations. Other commanders would speak of him with envy and respect in equal measure. Perhaps the Emperor himself would grant Zethral an audience to personally thank him for adding another world to the ever-growing territory of the Valkyrie. All of this would happen because the humans were too weak and too divided and too blind to stop what was coming for them. What Zethral did not know, what he could not possibly have imagined in his worst nightmares, was that tiny machines watched his fleet from the darkness between the stars. These machines were smaller than a Valkyrie fist, and they drifted through the void with no heat signature and no energy emissions that could be detected. They had been placed here decades ago by creatures who planned for the worst while hoping for the best, and now, as the Grand Armada passed by without noticing them, these tiny machines sent a signal racing toward the inner system at speeds that should have been impossible. The signal reached a relay station hidden in the ice of a distant comet, and from there it jumped to another station and another, until it arrived at its final destination in less than a minute on Earth's moon. In a facility buried deep beneath the gray dust and ancient rock, a screen lit up with words that changed everything. Zone TA seat confirmed. Hostile fleet detected. 12,000 vessels invasion trajectory. SciFi my Admiral Chun. Waylin read the message 3 times before she allowed herself to breathe. Again, they had known this day would come, and they had prepared for it in secret while the rest of humanity went about their normal lives without knowing the truth. She reached for the communication device that would connect her to every hidden base and secret weapon platform in the solar system. "This is UEDI command," she said in a voice that did not shake despite the fear she felt in her heart. "All stations confirm receipt and standby for Directive Omega." The Valkyrie thought they were hunters coming to claim easy prey. They had no idea that they had just entered a trap that humanity had spent 40 years building, and they would not understand their mistake until it was far too late to escape. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin had been waiting for this moment for 15 years. Ever since she first learned the truth about what humanity faced in the darkness between the stars. She remembered that day with perfect clarity. The day when her predecessor showed her the evidence that intelligent life existed beyond Earth, and that some of it wanted humanity dead. The first alien signals had been detected in 2089, picked up by a deep space monitoring station that was supposed to be searching for natural phenomena at first. The scientists thought they had found proof that humanity was not alone in the universe, and some of them wanted to celebrate this discovery as the greatest moment in human history, but the celebrations died quickly when the linguists and codebreakers finally translated what the signals actually said. They were military communications. The battle orders and fleet movements and reports of conquered worlds, and they painted a picture of a galaxy ruled by predators who saw every other species as either threats to be destroyed or resources to be exploited. The governments of Earth made a decision that would have seemed impossible just years before they agreed to keep the discovery secret from the public while they prepared for the day when the predators would come for humanity, the United Earth. Defense Initiative was born in secrecy, funded by hidden budgets and staffed by people who understood that they might be working on something that would never be used in their lifetimes. Admiral Chun walked through the corridors of Lunar Base Armstrong, her footsteps echoing in the metal hallways as she made her way to the command center all around her. Men and women moved with purpose and determination, their faces showing the tension that everyone felt now that the moment had finally arrived. 40 years of preparation was about to be tested against an enemy that had never lost a war. The command center was a massive room filled with screens and control stations, and every screen showed something that would have amazed the humans of a century ago. Chin could see the positions of the outer watch satellites, thousands of tiny machines that stretched from the Kuiper belt to the asteroid belt in an invisible net that nothing could pass through. Undetected, she could see the status of the weapons platforms hidden throughout the solar system, each one a fortress designed to destroy anything that threatened Earth. And she could see the enemy fleet, 12,000 red dots moving slowly toward the inner system like a swarm of hungry insects. Admiral on deck. Someone called out, and every person in the room stood at attention. As you were, Chun said quickly, because there was no time for ceremony when an alien invasion force was approaching. She walked to the central command station where General Marcus Okonkwo was already waiting for her with a grim expression on his dark face. The fleet is moving faster than we expected, Okonkwo said without any greeting, because they had known each other too long for such things. They will reach the asteroid belt in 72 hours. That gives us enough time, Chun replied as she studied the tactical display. What is the status of our assets? Okonkwo pulled up a new screen that showed the full extent of humanity's secret preparations. The showed the full extent of humanity's secret preparations. The Vonkostimisty secret preparations. The mice numbers were impressive by any standard. The result of 4 decades of work by millions of people who had dedicated their lives to building weapons they hoped would never be needed. Hidden in the asteroid belt were 347 weapons platforms, each one carrying railguns that could fire projectiles at 3% the speed of light around Mars. The defense grid consisted of 89 battle stations armed with particle beam weapons and missile batteries that contained enough firepower to crack a small moon. Scattered throughout the space between the belt and Mars were billions of autonomous mines, smart weapons that could tell the difference between friendly and enemy ships, and would attach themselves to hostile vessels before exploding. And then there were the drones. Over 50,000 of them waiting in hidden launch bays throughout the system, each one carrying an antimatter warhead that could destroy a ship 10 times its size. Everything is ready, Okonkwo confirmed. We just need your authorization to wake up the network. Chun felt the weight of that responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Like a physical force, once she gave the order, there would be no going back, and humanity would be committed to a war against an enemy they had never fought before. But she also knew that failing to act would mean the end of everything humanity had ever been or ever could be. You have my authorization, she said in a voice that carried across the entire command center. Execute Directive Omega and bring all systems to full combat readiness. The room exploded into activity as officers began transmitting orders to every hidden base and weapons platform in the solar system. Chun watched the displays as status lights changed from standby yellow to active green, one after another, until the entire system was lit up like a Christmas tree. For the first time in human history, every nation on Earth was working together with a single purpose, though most of humanity still did not know what that purpose was. The secret had been kept because the world's leaders understood that panic would help no one and might even make things worse. Better to let people live their normal lives while the professionals handled the threat that hung over everyone's heads. Chen thought about her daughter and her 2 grandchildren, all of them living in Beijing, without any idea that their grandmother was about to fight a war for their survivals. She thought about all the families on Earth who were going about their daily routines, working and playing and loving each other, completely unaware that alien warships were approaching their home. That was why she was here. And that was why millions of others had dedicated their lives to this moment, not for glory or recognition, but for the simple chance to protect the people they loved from predators who saw them as nothing more than future slaves. "Admiral," a young officer called out from one of the monitoring stations, "we are detecting unusual activity in the enemy fleet." Chun moved to look at the officer's screen and saw that several enemy ships had broken formation and were moving ahead of the main fleet. "Scout ships," Okonkwo said from beside her. "They are sending advance units to check the path before the main force arrives." "How many?" Chun asked. 18 vessels, moving at high speed toward the outer edge of the asteroid belt. Chun smiled. But there was no warmth in that smile, only the cold satisfaction of a hunter who sees her prey walking into a trap. "Let them come," she said quietly. "Let them see what they find." The scout ships would be the first to learn that humanity was not the helpless prey the Valkyrie expected. They would be the first to die. But they would not be the last. Chun turned back to the main display and watched the red dots moving closer to the green line that marked the outer boundary of the asteroid belt. Beyond that line, death waited in the darkness, patient and silent and hungry for alien blood. The Valkyrie had come to conquer Earth, but they would never reach it. They would never even reach Mars. Admiral Chen Wei-lin would make sure of that, no matter what it cost. The 18 scout ships of the Valkyrie Advance Force moved through the darkness of space with the confidence of predators who had never known fear. Captain Krelvos commanded the lead vessel, a sleek warship designed for speed and reconnaissance, and he was eager to prove himself worthy of promotion to the main battle fleet. This was supposed to be a simple mission, nothing more than checking the path ahead for any obstacles that might slow the Grand Armada's advance toward the primitive human homeworld. Relevos had studied the intelligence reports just like every other officer in the fleet, and he knew that the humans had no significant presence in this part of their system. Asteroid belt was supposed to be empty, except for a few automated mining stations that could be destroyed without any effort at all. "Captain," his sensor officer called out, "we are entering the outer boundary of the asteroid field now. Maintain formation and increase scanning range," Krelvos ordered as he leaned forward in his command chair. "I want to know about anything larger than a pebble before we get close to it." The scout ships spread out slightly to cover more area. As they moved between the tumbling rocks that filled this region of space, asteroids of all sizes drifted past them, some no bigger than a fist and others larger than mountains, all of them spinning slowly in the eternal silence of the void. Krelvos found the sight boring rather than impressive. Just dead rocks in empty space with nothing interesting to see or report. He was about to order an increase in speed when his sensor officer made a strange sound that caught his attention. "Captain, I am detecting an anomaly on one of the larger asteroids ahead." "What kind of anomaly?" Krelvos asked with mild curiosity. "I am not certain." "Captain, it appears to be a heat signature, but it is very faint and could be natural volcanic activity." Krelvos snorted with amusement at the idea of volcanic activity on a cold dead rock in the middle of nowhere. "It is probably just a sensor glitch from passing through all these debris particles. But mark the location, and we will include it in our report to the High Commander." Those were the last words Captain Krelvos ever spoke from the surface of the asteroid called Ceres, a railgun that humanity had built in secret and hidden beneath layers of rock and ice, fired its first shot in anger. The projectile was a simple thing. Just a cylinder of depleted uranium about 2 meters long and half a meter wide. But it was moving at 9,000 kilometers per second when it struck the lead scout ship. There was no explosion in the traditional sense because there was no atmosphere to carry a blast wave instead. The kinetic energy of the impact converted both the projectile and the target into a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated plasma that had been a ship and crew just a fraction of a second before the other. Scout ship captains barely had time to register that something had happened when 16 more railgun rounds struck their vessels. With the same devastating results, 17 ships were destroyed in less than 4 seconds. Their crews never knowing what hit them or where the attack came from. The 18th ship, slightly behind the others due to an engine malfunction that its captain had been cursing just moments before, survived long enough for its crew to understand that they were under attack, but understanding did not mean they could do anything about it. The captain of that final scout ship screamed orders for evasive maneuvers while his weapons officer tried frantically to locate the source of the attack. They found nothing. No enemy ships on their sensors. No weapon platforms, no missiles or energy beams that they could dodge or shoot down, just death coming at them from the darkness without any warning at all. The final railgun round struck the 18th scout ship exactly 2.7 seconds after the first shot was fired. And then there was silence in the asteroid belt, once more on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest. High Commander Zethral received the report with a mixture of shock and fury that made his scales darken to an angry red. "What do you mean they are gone?" he demanded of his communications officer. "All 18 vessels have stopped transmitting, High Commander, and we are receiving no responses to our signals." Zethral turned to his tactical display and stared at the area where his scout ships had been just minutes before. The sensors showed nothing but asteroid debris and expanding clouds of gas that could have been anything. Could it have been a natural phenomenon? His first officer asked with obvious doubt in his voice. Perhaps a collision with an unseen object? All 18 ships at the same time? Zethral snarled back. "Do not insult my intelligence with such foolish suggestions." He stood from his command chair and began pacing across the bridge as his mind worked through the implications of what had just happened. The humans were supposed to be primitive and helpless, unable to detect the approaching fleet, and certainly unable to mount any kind of defense against Valkyrie technology, but something had just destroyed 18 warships in seconds. And whatever it was had not shown up on any sensors before or after the attack. "Order the fleet to full combat alert," Zethral commanded, "and send the second wave of scouts with a full escort of destroyer-class vessels." "How many destroyers, High Commander?" 50, Zethral said after a moment of thought. "Let us see if the humans can handle 50 of our warships as easily as they handled 18. The second wave of Valkyrie ships moved toward the asteroid belt with weapons charged and sensors at maximum sensitivity. They expected to find whatever had destroyed the first scouts and eliminated with overwhelming firepower. What they found instead was a nightmare beyond anything their experience had prepared them for. Railguns on series opened fire again. But this time they were not alone. Hidden platforms on dozens of asteroids throughout the region activated their weapons and began firing in a coordinated barrage that filled space with deadly projectiles. The Valkyrie destroyers tried to return fire, but they could not hit targets they could not see. And the railgun platforms had been designed specifically to be invisible to alien sensors. Then came the drones from hidden launch bays scattered across the belt. Thousands of small craft emerged like a swarm of angry insects. Each drone was barely larger than a Valkyrie escape pod, far too small for the point defense systems that were designed to track and destroy missiles and torpedoes, and each drone carried an antimatter warhead with enough power to crack open a destroyer like an egg. The Valkyrie weapons. Officers tried desperately to shoot down the incoming swarm, but there were too many targets moving too fast in too many directions. Drones slammed into ship after ship, their warheads detonating on impact and converting matter into pure energy in blinding flashes that lit up the darkness. The 50 destroyers that were supposed to provide overwhelming support for the scouts lasted less than 2 minutes before the last one was torn apart by multiple drone impacts. Back on the Eternal Conquest, High Commander Zethral watched the disaster unfold on his tactical display with growing horror in the span of half an hour. He had lost 68 ships and over 40,000 crew members to an enemy he could not see and could not fight. For the first time in his 2-century career of conquest and victory, Zethral felt the cold grip of fear tightening around his heart. But he was a warrior of the Dominion, and warriors did not retreat. All ships advance, he ordered in a voice that shook only slightly. We will crush these human insects with the full might of the Grand Armada. It was the worst decision he had ever made in his life. The Grand Armada pushed forward through the asteroid belt, and with every kilometer they advanced, more ships died. High Commander Zethral had never experienced anything like this in all his years of warfare across the galaxy. The Bayes humans had turned the space between their outer planets into a killing ground, and his fleet was bleeding from 1,000 wounds that they could not stop or heal. Railgun rounds struck from impossible angles, fired by platforms hidden among millions of tumbling rocks that all looked exactly the same. Drone swarms emerged from the darkness without warning, overwhelming point defense systems that had been designed to fight enemies who followed the normal rules of warfare in the mines. Billions of tiny devices that drifted invisibly through the void attached themselves to ship hulls and detonated in sequence to crack open armored vessels from the inside. By the time the survivors of the Grand Armada cleared the asteroid belt and entered open space again, Zethral had lost over 1,400 ships and the crews who served on them. The tactical display that had once shown a proud formation of 12,000 warships now showed gaps and holes where entire battle groups had been wiped out. But Zethral refused to turn back, because turning back would mean admitting defeat. And the Valkyrie Dominion had never admitted defeat in 12,000 years of conquest. How far to the human homeworld? He asked his navigation officer in a voice that had grown hoarse from shouting orders and curses. At current speed, we will reach the planet called Earth in approximately 47 hours. High Commander, and what lies between us and the target? The navigation officer hesitated before answering, and that hesitation told Zethral everything he needed to know about what came next. The 4th planet. High Commander, the one the humans call Mars. Zethral studied the tactical display and saw the red planet waiting for them like a silent sentinel guarding the path to Earth. Intelligence reports had indicated that the humans had established some small colonies on Mars. Nothing more than scientific outposts with a few thousand inhabitants. But after what had happened in the asteroid belt, Zethral no longer trusted anything the intelligence reports said about human capabilities. What defenses can we detect around Mars? He demanded. His sensor officer worked frantically at her station before looking up with confusion on her face. I am detecting numerous structures in orbit around the planet, High Commander, as well as significant modifications to the 2 moons. What kind of modifications? I cannot determine their exact nature at this distance, but the smaller moon appears to have been extensively hollowed out and filled with unknown equipment. Zethral felt his scales darken again as cold rage replaced the fear that had been growing in his chest. These humans had been playing a game with the entire galaxy, pretending to be weak and primitive, while secretly building weapons and fortifications that no species, at their supposed level of development, should possess. They had fooled the Dominion's intelligence networks for decades, and that deception would cost them dearly when Zethro finally reached their homeworld and burned it to ash. "All ships prepare for planetary assault," he commanded. "We will destroy whatever defenses the humans have placed around Mars and continue to Earth without stopping." The remaining ships of the Grand Armada formed into attack formations as they approached Mars, their weapons charged and their crews ready to unleash destruction on anything that stood in their way. They expected resistance, perhaps a few orbital platforms or ground-based missiles that could be easily overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. What they found was something far worse. The moment the first Valkyrie ships crossed an invisible line in space, the Mars defense grid came alive. From platforms scattered throughout Mars orbit, particle beam weapons opened fire with precision that should have been impossible at such distances. The beams were invisible in the vacuum of space, moving at the speed of light and striking their targets before any warning could be given. A battlecruiser at the front of the formation was hit by 3 beams simultaneously, each one cutting through armor and internal systems like a hot knife through soft meat. The ship broke apart in silence, its reactor containment failing and adding a brief flash of light to the destruction. More beams followed, striking ship after ship in a relentless barrage that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Valkyrie gunners fired back anything that looked like a target, but their weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat at ranges where light lag could be compensated for. Human platforms were too far away, too well protected, and too numerous to be destroyed by return fire that arrived seconds after being launched. Then the smaller moon, Phobos, revealed its true purpose. Deep within the hollowed-out rock, fusion reactors that had been building power for decades released their energy through focusing arrays the size of cities. A beam of coherent light, brighter than a sun, lanced across space and struck a Valkyrie dreadnought directly amidships. The ship was 3 kilometers long and carried over 10,000 crew members, and it was split in half by that single shot. The 2 halves tumbled away from each other, spilling atmosphere and bodies into the void as secondary explosions tore through what remained of the once mighty vessel. High Commander Zethral watched his fleet being systematically dismantled and felt something he had only ever seen in the eyes of conquered species. He felt despair. "High Commander, we must retreat." His first officer shouted over the chaos of alarms and damage reports that filled the bridge. "If we continue this attack, we will lose the entire fleet." "The Dominion does not retreat," Zethral shouted back, but even as he said the words, he knew they were hollow. The Dominion had never faced an enemy like this, an enemy who had hidden their true strength behind a mask of weakness and waited patiently for their prey to walk into a trap. These humans were not the primitive savages the intelligence reports had described. They were predators, just like the Valkyrie, and they had been preparing for this moment while the Dominion grew complacent in its assumed superiority. "Order all ships to push forward," Zethral commanded, though his voice lacked the conviction it once carried. "We will break through their defenses or die trying." The Grand Armada surged toward Mars in a desperate charge that threw away any pretense of tactical coordination. Ships fired wildly at everything in range while trying to dodge beams and projectiles that came at them from all directions. Some vessels made it through the orbital defenses only to encounter the next layer of human preparation. The space between Mars and the inner system was filled with mines, just like the asteroid belt, and these mines were even more sophisticated than the ones that had already cost the fleet so many ships. They worked in groups, coordinating their attacks to maximize damage and targeting critical systems like engines and weapons arrays. A battlecruiser that had survived everything else suddenly found itself drifting helplessly as dozens of mines attached to its propulsion systems and detonated simultaneously without engines. It became an easy target for the orbital platforms that finished it off with cold efficiency. The battle lasted for 6 hours, and during those 6 hours, the Grand Armada was reduced from over 10,000 ships to less than 100 high. Commander Zethro survived only because his flagship was positioned at the rear of the formation, protected by thousands of other vessels that died in its place. When silence finally fell over the battlefield, he looked at his tactical display and saw the truth that he could no longer deny. The invasion was over. The Valkyrie Dominion had been defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitive and insignificant, and now, with only 11 ships remaining from a fleet of 12,000, Zethro had to make the hardest decision of his life. "Set course for home," he said quietly, and the words tasted like poison on his tongue. "We must report what has happened here." The 11 survivors turned away from Mars and began the long journey back to Dominion space behind them. The red planet hung in the darkness like a blood-stained monument to their failure, and on that planet, human soldiers watched them go with grim satisfaction in their hearts. Admiral Chen Wei-lin stood on the observation deck of Lunar Base Armstrong and watched the 11 Valkyrie ships disappear into the darkness beyond the outer planets. General Okonkwo stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest as he tracked the fleeing vessels on a portable display. "We could destroy them," he said quietly. "One more salvo from the outer platforms would finish what we started." "No," Chen replied without taking her eyes off the stars. "We need them to survive. Why would we want any of them to survive after what they came here to do?" Chen finally turned to face her old friend and colleague, and there was something in her eyes that made Okonkwo take a step back. It was not anger or satisfaction or relief that the battle was over. It was cold calculation. The look of someone who was thinking many moves ahead in a game that had only just begun. "Those 11 ships will return to their homeworld and report what happened here," Chan explained in a voice that carried the weight of humanity's future. "They will tell their leaders about the weapons they could not see and the defenses they could not break, and you think that will stop others from coming? Not by itself, but it will make them think twice before trying what the Valkyrie tried." Chun turned back to the observation window and looked at the blue marble of Earth hanging in the distance. Beautiful and fragile and worth every sacrifice that had been made to protect it. "We have sent a message today, Marcus. A message that will spread across the entire galaxy once those survivors tell their story." "What message is that?" "That humanity is not prey." 3 years passed before the 11 surviving ships of the Grand Armada finally reached Valkyrie space. The journey had been long and difficult, with failing systems and dwindling supplies pushing the damaged vessels to their absolute limits. When they finally entered orbit around the Dominion homeworld, the crews were barely alive, and their commander was a shadow of the proud warrior who had led 12,000 ships to what should have been easy conquest. Hi. Commander Zethro was taken directly to the Dominion Council, a gathering of the most powerful leaders in Valkyrie society who had ruled their empire for thousands of years without ever experiencing defeat. They sat in their ornate chairs in a chamber designed to intimidate anyone who stood before them, and they listened in growing disbelief as Zethro told them what had happened at Sol. "You were telling us that a single primitive species destroyed the greatest fleet the Dominion has assembled in 3 centuries? The Supreme Chancellor asked with contempt dripping from every word. "I am telling you the truth, Supreme Chancellor, whether you wish to believe it or not." Zethro stood straight despite his exhaustion and met the Chancellor's eyes without flinching. He had failed his mission and brought shame upon his name and his family. But he would not be called a liar by anyone, not even the leader of the Dominion itself. The humans are not primitive. He continued in a voice that echoed through the silent chamber. They only pretended to be primitive, while they built weapons that we cannot match and defenses that we cannot penetrate. Impossible. Another council member interrupted. Our intelligence services have studied their transmissions for decades and found nothing to suggest such capabilities. Then your intelligence services were fooled. Just as I was fooled. Just as the entire Grand Armada was fooled before we died. Zethral pulled out a recording device and activated it, projecting images onto the chamber walls that made several council members gasp in shock. They saw ships being torn apart by invisible projectiles that moved faster than anything the Dominion possessed. They saw swarms of tiny drones, overwhelming point defense systems that had been considered impenetrable. They saw a moon converted into a weapon that could destroy a dreadnought with a single shot, and they saw the expanding clouds of debris that had once been 12,000 warships and millions of Valkyrie warriors. This is what happens when you underestimate humanity, Zethral said as the recording ended. They knew we were coming years before we arrived, and they used that time to turn their entire solar system into a trap. How could they have known? The Supreme Chancellor demanded, because they are not the foolish creatures we believe them to be. Supreme Chancellor, they are hunters who disguise themselves as prey and wait for their enemies to come to them. Zethral paused and looked around the chamber at faces that showed fear for the first time in living memory. Everything they showed the galaxy was a lie. Their radio transmissions about wars and pollution and internal conflicts were meant to make us think they were weak and divided. You are saying it was deliberate deception. I am saying that a species intelligent enough to hide weapons among asteroids and build fortresses inside moons is intelligent enough to know that other species were listening to their communications. The council sat in stunned silence as they absorbed the implications of what Zethral was telling them for 12,000 years. The Valkyrie had been the greatest power in the galaxy, conquering every species they encountered, and expanding their territory without any serious opposition now. They faced the reality that a species from a single, small planet had destroyed their greatest fleet without losing a single one of their own vessels. What do you recommend? The Supreme Chancellor finally asked, and there was no more contempt in his voice. Only the cautious tone of someone who has learned that the universe is more dangerous than he ever imagined. Avoid Sol. Zethral answered immediately. Avoid it completely and permanently, and spread word to every other power in the galaxy that humanity is not to be provoked. You want us to flee from primitives? I want us to survive, Zethral replied with more steel in his voice than he had shown since the battle. The Dominion cannot afford another defeat like this one, and we cannot afford to give the humans a reason to come looking for us. The council debated for many hours, but in the end, they had no real choice. The evidence was undeniable, and the loss of the Grand Armada had weakened the Dominion in ways that would take centuries to recover. From a new entry was added to the Galactic database, transmitted to every known species, and displayed as a warning to anyone foolish enough to ignore its species. Human homeworld, Earth. Sol system status. Do not engage classification. Apex ambush predator notes. Territorial and assumes all contact is hostile. Possesses military capabilities far beyond apparent technological level. First contact resulted in total loss of invasion fleet. Exercise extreme caution and avoid all interaction. If approached by human vessels, do not resist and surrender immediately. The Sol system was designated a forbidden zone, and no Valkyrie ship was permitted to travel within 2 light years of the yellow star that humanity called home. Other species received the warning and added their own restrictions to their navigation charts. And within a decade, the region of space surrounding Sol was avoided by every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy on Earth. Humanity learned the truth about what had happened, The secret could not be kept forever, and the governments of the world decided that their people deserved to know how close they had come to annihilation and how their protectors had saved them. There were celebrations and parades, and monuments built to honor those who had spent their lives preparing for a war they hoped would never come. Admiral Chen Weilin became a hero, a name spoken with reverence by billions of people who owed their freedom and their lives to her leadership. But Chen herself felt no joy in the victory, because she knew that this was only the beginning of a much longer story. The galaxy now knew that humanity existed, and the galaxy had learned to fear what humanity could do. That fear might keep them safe for a while, but fear could also turn to hatred, and hatred could drive enemies to take risks they would never normally consider, standing on the surface of Mars, looking up at the stars that had once threatened to send death down upon her species. Chen made a silent promise to herself and to every human who would ever live. They would never stop watching, never stop preparing, never stop building the defenses that protected their home. And if anyone ever made the mistake of threatening Earth again, they would learn the same lesson that the Valkyrie had learned in Fire and Blood. Humanity was not prey. Humanity had never been prey, and the darkness between the stars would remember that lesson for as long as the universe existed, far away, on worlds that humanity had never seen. Alien species read the warning in the galactic database and wondered about the creatures who lived around that small yellow star. Some of them were curious, some of them were afraid, and some of them were wise enough to be both. But all of them understood one simple truth that would shape the future of the galaxy for ages to come. Earth was not a target. Earth was a warning, and humanity would be waiting, patient and silent and ready for anyone foolish enough to ignore it.